if that would actually happen, if AI would become somehow, it's still far from it, autopoetic, then of course it wouldn't be conscious either. It would be something else.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I've got a good friend of mine with me. It's Georg, or Professor Möller from the YouTube channel Carefree Wandering. He's been on this channel before, and I'm happy to have you back on the channel, Georg.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Always
Today,
nice talking to you.
yes, for sure. Today, we wanted to talk about the deep differences between man and the machine, something we've spoken about for quite some hours in the past, and I thought it'd be useful
Sean,
for people,
humans, between humans and the machine, please.
humans, between
Not
humans.
man and the machine.
Okay, okay, I
You have
apologize.
to watch your gendering.
Okay, I apologize. Rewind. We're speaking about the deep differences between humans and the machine, and we are going to focus on the stuff we've been talking about, namely about the difference between autopoietic and allopoietic systems. So, starting off, can you please explain to us what is that difference?
Well, first, I'm slightly object even to even the phrase between humans and the machine, not for gendering purposes. That you clarified that or you rectified that,
Right.
but still, of course, I mean, my position, theoretically speaking, is basically orthodox Lumanianism, orthodox social systems theory, basically, which is of course derived from systems theory. Now, one of the core pillars of Luhmann's approach to systems theory, which is relevant for precisely this question that you were asking. One of the core pillars is that the theory is, as he says himself, radically anti-humanist. So we're not talking about something that is specifically human. This is already somehow a kind of misleading conception. What we are talking about is basically the question that is central question of the ongoing discourses about AI, namely, is it correct to say that AI is AI, that AI is artificial intelligence, that AI, to assume that AI therefore resembles consciousness, resembles, and now we can bring in humans, how humans think. Now, humans do a lot of other things too. Humans have bodies and humans have societies and so forth. But that is not precise. That is not, we could also ask that question, but I understand that's not the question. So, to ask the question precisely, and as philosophers and theoreticians, we want to use our vocabulary precisely. I think the question you wanted to ask is what's the difference between consciousness, human consciousness, and artificial intelligence, well, what we call artificial intelligence. Is that correct?
Yes, I'd say that's a good reformulation of my question for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just asking, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you think otherwise, um, now the core the now as you know much more about artificial intelligence than I. So I'm not really the best person to talk to you about it, but it seems to me from like an my external perspective, coming again basically from my understanding of Luhmann social systems theory, that the big decisive difference between AI, why I think AI shouldn't be called AI, and human consciousness is that the one to me human consciousness is again following Luhmann clearly autopoietic, whereas it seems to me that AI is not autopoietic. And that this is like a major difference. And I'm not sure if it's, supposed to ever be autopoietic or not. And the question is it allopoetic? But then again, I don't really understand enough about AI to really know if it is allopoetic or not. But I assume that it is not. Want me to address the difference between these two concepts, allopoetic and autopoetic, or do you want to maybe address it yourself?
Well, so the basic idea behind this is that we have, or we as humans have used technology as metaphors for our life, for ourselves, for many years. There's been attempts at seeing the human brain as a complex machine, as seeing it like the when the metaphors were more focused on machines akin to electric or steam-based machines, it was
Yes,
at the times when those machines were dominant, and so we're in a way we're just kind of following that tradition of making technological
exactly.
metaphors into our computational age. And there seems to be some sort of reciprocal relationship. There seems to be some sort of relationship where these kind of metaphors, these kind of technological metaphors, in turn allow us to expand the sphere of technology and improve
Right.
and amplify technology. So there seems to be some sort of interrelationship, and this is where I find that difference between autopoiesis and allopoiesis so interesting, because there seems to be a kind of allopoiesis of the individual machine being dependent on human ingenuity, human construction, but there seems to be an autopoiesis in the sense of technology co-evolving with our cognitive infrastructures,
Right.
with our ability to reason and construct technology.
Well, again, like if AI is allopoetic, if AI is autopoetic, then it would have to to produce itself out of its operation. Then it would really be dependent specific steering on a specific steering mechanism by, for instance, programmer. Just as our thinking, like thought, is not somehow being programmed by a steering mechanism. It takes place and evolves, of course, within an environment that right? So thinking couldn't exist. Again, now here we come to the main conception. Should explain this why I still speak of human consciousness, but why it's at the same time radically anti-humanist, and Luhmann's one says that. So it means that again, thought is an autopoietic system. Psychic systems are autopoietic, and they evolve within an environment that consists, for instance, on the one hand, of biological systems, very importantly the brain, but also other things in the physical environment, as well as in other in the environment of society. And there is no kind of, that's why it's not humanist, there is no control. It's not that whatever, like in the old, also the metaphors you mentioned in the history of philosophy, right, where the mind was envisioned as somehow control agents, a kind of that can steer the body like a machine. Like in Descartes, for instance, we find this mechanistic understanding. And so the traditional humanist conception, usually mind focused, inherits this from the Western philosophical tradition, at least. Actually, that ties in with the conversation I had with Brix Porn ago on God. It's still like this, it's kind of the humanist version of this Platonic Christian idea of mind, spirit that is somehow in control of everything else. That humans are these kind of autonomous systems that give themselves, that is a Kantian, of course, term, it's somehow steer themselves by means of reason, right? Even in Kant, we have the same idea that kind of then takes over somehow control on the basis of its structures and so forth. Anyways, the point is that thought is embedded in systemically, now going back to Luhmann and systems theory, within biological systems and at the same time also within social systems and other systems like, whatever, natural environment, the weather, and so forth. Right? And none of these systems is in control. It also means none of these systems is kind of, to go back to what you said, allopoetic programming another one, right? Not, I think this is that is also, I think, the case even like scientists like Sapolsky, I hope, would ultimately agree, but how I understand them, that there is a kind of, nexus or so where certain brain functions, for instance, you know, in a mechanical way, produce one thought and only one specific thought. There is no direct causal connection, no, no causal mechanical steering. And that seems to be, to an extent, different. One more thing, sorry. This also means, of course, that these different systems evolve on their own, not autonomous. They're embedded in, they are contingent upon the environment. They are conditioned, as I like to say, by the environment within which they exist. And yet they are not somehow cybernetically controlled by some form of, that would be allopoetics.
Mm-hmm.
That a system somehow, let's say, managed by another system. And it seems to me that an autopoiesis, not autonomy, again, it shouldn't be confused with autonomy.
Right.
Autopoiesis, that a system evolves by through its own uh, through its own processes, but of course, always irritated as structurally coupled, as he says, embedded in, would say, as I just said, repeating myself, conditioned by, influenced by, limited by its environment, which again is not one environment, but the environment consists of basically innumerable other systems that it is impossible to give a full account of, right? So that is complexity.
Right.
And all these systems mutually condition one another at the same time without a central steering mechanism, without a central control mechanism. And within that kind of systemic setup, there are a lot of autopoiesis. There is still also poise, right? I mean, and whatever we have cybernetically, of course, when you drive your car, that's you build a car and then you drive it. That's allopoietic steering. But yeah, that doesn't. And I wonder, and the question, where is AI on this kind of? Does it fall into the spectrum at all, or is it somehow neither really allopoietic or autopoietic? Again, I think it's clearly not autopoietic, um, but I'm not sure if it's allopoietic. Sorry for repeating.
Right. So, what comes to my mind when thinking about these things is like, what is the specific connection? If you had to formalize it, what is the specific connection that differentiates, let's say, a allopoietic relationship and the structural coupling within autopoietic systems? And from what I can see, there is one of it assumes a kind of input output determinism in a sense, the way you just
Right.
put it. The way you just put it, I understood. You said there, it seems to you like there is no clear, you could say, algorithm that can trace a physical neural function to a specific thought. And what I
Right.
noticed, especially in my background in physics, is that in order to engage in any form of deterministic science, you have to cut loose any circular connections. You can model them to some extent, But as soon as you have circularity, as soon as you have a back reaction, for example, you have a particle in a field. In physics, you kind of assume a decoupling of that particle in the field. You call it a test particle that moves through that field, because in reality, each movement of that particle is going to have a reaction on the field, is going to change the field.
Exactly.
That will change the
Exactly.
way that particle moves, and the amount of
Exactly.
influence and back reaction, if we want to calculate it, will differ vastly just based on the time steps, just based on the steps you want to
Exactly.
calculate, or the
Exactly.
amount of
That's why you have
fine
to
graining.
artificially construct an environment that isn't an environment.
Yeah,
Environment that is completely neutral. And this costs like millions of dollars. And then they have this particle, I don't know what they're called, right?
accelerators. Yeah,
And
yeah.
they are basically the construction of an environment that isn't an environment because it kind of all complexity is kind of excluded.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was wondering, it's essentially these circular back reactions that prevent you from having a clean input output relationship. And
Yes, and then the question is also AI would be allopoetic if it would be, so to speak, allowed, be conditioned by infinite environments.
you mean it would be autopoietic?
Then it would be autopoetic. If it would
Autopoietic.
not just, be fed with certain whatever language, it would also have to be somehow coupled to the temperature of the machines and to weather and to all these things that you just mentioned. And there would have to be constant kind of systemic feedback mechanism with all these systems in a living environment. That seems to be clearly not the case.
Yeah, well, I find something I hinted at earlier is I find there is two different ways of looking at it. So if you look at the specific machine as a separate entity, the machine as a, you could say, like a very simplified functional box, then you require, in order to even construct it, you require a sort of input output determinism. You kind of need it to be allopoietic
Exactly.
poietic to build it.
Yes. Exactly.
And that's something
Exactly.
that even someone like Roger Penrose, drawing on the works of the mathematician Kurt Gödel, tried to even use as a sort of mathematical proof that AI is not conscious, or he didn't put it in that terms,
Yes.
but mathematical proof that consciousness is not computational, rather.
Exactly.
And he
And
essentially,
another thing, if I may interrupt,
yeah,
if that would actually happen, if AI would become somehow, it's still far from it, autopoietic, then of course it wouldn't be conscious either. It would be something else,
right.
right? Because its own autopoiesis, in order to become autopoiesis, by definition, it would have to not be conscious, but something else. Otherwise, it would meld into consciousness. And that would be not what it's supposed to do. We want to not just have another consciousness, we want it to do things that consciousness can't do.
Yes, and that's actually a very good point. As in, what's for me the conclusion, or the thing following up from these, let's say, more logical proofs of incompatibility of consciousness and computation, what they lead to essentially is that you kind of have this relationship where Penrose, for example, sought to prove that provability or consistency is not the same thing as truth. There seems to be a sort of phenomenal difference that can be recognized by a conscious entity between pure logical consistency and truth. And that's something he showed by showing that you can construct self-referential loops that are in improcessable by a logical system, right? There's a certain, you can extract a proof where it says this sentence is not provable, essentially, and as an observer, you can see that the sentence is true, but the system itself cannot see that, quote unquote, see as a metaphor, right? So he showed a certain limitation as it is incapable of working with these circular back connections, these circular feedback loops,
Right.
so to say. And so what I'm wondering though is, what if we don't know the rules of the system? What if the technological system is not something that we built with the presupposition of it being allopoietic, with the presupposition that we know all its rules and we've logically constructed them. And that kind of brings me more towards these theories of technology being something that's intricately linked to our own cognitive evolution. That it is something not separate from us, but it's not necessarily a particular machine. It's more a process. It's more technology as a process, not AI as this machine and that machine, but technology as a process. And there we have a whole different
I think
question.
that makes a lot of sense, Sean. And that fits again quite nicely to Luhmann's theory. In this sense, we might indeed say it's autopoietic, like whatever. Again, that's why Luhmann is not a humanist. So whatever. Um, social system, legal system, they also constantly autopoietically evolve, again, without being in control. They are social systems like comparable to evolution of the human body, who also evolve, but not under control, again, or steered, or uh, this input-output relation of human minds. And now we have, let's say, a technological system, which is somehow, is it a social? Not so sure, but I don't know exactly. But that would also fit very nicely again into the kind of into the Lumanian theoretical framework. Look at AI is, let's say, somehow the technology system, which is now kind of building up, merging as maybe a new form of a very new form of a social system,
Of an autopoietic
communication
system.
system. Yes, of an autopoietic system. It's
Yeah,
like
like an
the
autopoietic
social
system.
system, which are also
Right. And it would be an autopoietic system of its own, potentially not even a social or a cognitive system, but its own separate
exactly,
entity in a sense.
potentially neither nor.
Yeah, I like another to bring in
That is the
another.
interesting thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, Luhmann kind of predicted that. He has a few hints. I tried to find them, but he wrote so much, and then it's difficult to find him exactly. But there are like two or three passages at least I could find, but I forgot exactly where they were. Where he's precise at the beginning of the book, Social Systems, Soziales, like the first one of the passages, where he says that, yeah, we can now kind of imagine that there is a fourth system, kind of system. And I think what we just said, maybe we're witnessing exactly. We're witnessing precisely this. That there is this fourth system is not AI on its own. It's the whole kind of new digital technology, or technology in general, which kind of course, it evolves within the environment of human thought, within the environment of all social systems, within the environment of bodies, and again within the environment of the weather and so. Uh, but just like whatever the legal system. Uh, so the anti-humanist point is very important here. The legal system is not a human system in the sense that it is by, for, and of human beings. We shouldn't understand anything in society like this. We should, and but it's a communication system, right? With its specific social, structures and so forth. And it seems like this kind of technology that may now be emerging is not really a social system.
Yeah, I mean, an analogy or a metaphor that I like to make here is the stock market. If you look at the markets today,
Yes,
most of the actors in that market are already machines and algorithms. They're already
sure.
algorithmically saturated. You could call it a kind of a
Yes,
technological system. However,
yes.
we know that nobody knows the rules of that system. It doesn't function like a
Okay, but
conventional
no one
machine.
can. Oh, exactly. If it's an autopoietic system, no one knows the rules, and not even the system itself.
Exactly, and
Rules.
we know for sure that no one knows the rules of the system, because if someone did, he would own the world, or he would,
Exactly. Yes, yes,
he
yes,
or she
yes, yes,
would basically own everything. Um, so
yes.
we know for sure that these rules are
Exactly.
not known by anyone, and yet it seems to be a technological or technologized system of a sort that is somehow linked to our social and our cognitive systems. It's somehow interconnected with them.
Exactly.
And now to
Yes.
transfer that to artificial intelligence, what we have is potentially a shift of focus from, instead of looking at the pure architecture of the algorithm, it's actually the data that it's trained with that is the
Yes.
largest chunk
Yes.
of the AI system. That is the, you could say it's almost
Yeah.
the value is there. And so potentially this kind of feeding, this flow of data going into the machine could be, and then the output coming out back to us could be the building up of a particular loop of sorts, you could say. It is a kind of a feedback loop that is being built up, that is still kind of delayed, it's still slow, it's still steeped in allopoietic kind of frameworks, because the data takes way longer to curate and train the system with than you can funnel in new data. But the question is, if these systems accelerate, this loop could become more integrate, right? And then the consciousness, it's almost like the metaphor of the I'm using a lot of metaphors here, but like it's almost like the metaphor of the mirror. You know, you're looking into the mirror, you're seeing a conscious being, and thus you conclude the mirror must be
Yes.
conscious, right? That's the kind of fallacy
I
there.
mean, that goes back to a very interesting philosophical topic. Very, I think, philosophical topic that you were talking about earlier, the metaphors. And we always have metaphors. We cannot, but it's impossible not to use metaphors. But of course, we can reflect on the metaphors and should reflect if we are using like correct metaphors. The correct metaphors are helpful or not helpful. If they may be, it's more often that if they're not outdated. A lot of the metaphors I think we use about AI are
Right, right.
so we should try to find better metaphors.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I think you can see the hesitancy of looking at AI as conscious systems or autopoietic systems, if that's the implication, in the fact that they, in their architecture, are still, you could say, classical. They're still allopoietic. They still require deterministic rules, even though they are so complex that no one can write down those rules. You couldn't. No human can possibly predict the outcome of a neural network because it's too complex. But just in principle, it is predictable, right? In principle, there are, you know, hundreds of thousands of neurons, hundreds of thousands of weights, or even more, and there is. If you did take the time and spend 1,000 years calculating
Yes,
all those calculations by
because
hand,
it
you would
is
get a result.
because it is yeah, because it is conditioned by a limited environment.
Yeah,
Is not kind of embedded in an infinite number of other systems that all under no central control mutually conditional. But
right.
then we're just repeating ours. Well, I'm repeating, sorry.
Yeah, but
But
that's
really, the key
fascinating.
point is if I mean to repeat a second thing again. I mean, but I think that's really a key point that if AI would really become autopoietic, then it wouldn't be conscious. So this kind of idea, oh, that will it become autopoietic and then it is conscious, then it is sentient. That is also completely wrong,
Mm,
right? Because if it would actually be autopoietic, it would be something else.
right. Yeah,
Wouldn't be a body, it wouldn't be a mind, and it wouldn't be a social system. It would be
precisely.
a fourth kind of system.
Yeah, yeah, precisely. Yeah. So the only one thing I wanted to still ask and wonder about is, you're speaking of technology perhaps emerging as a new autopoietic system. So in a sense that there has been only three or more, and now we're adding another one that hadn't been there before. So from
Right.
my
And
perspective,
we're not, it's emerging.
it's emerging.
Can't edit. No
It,
one can edit.
okay, it's emerging, but emerging for me implies that in a way it's always been there. That it's in a way always been there.
Not
It's
sure. Like again, like I'm thinking about this again, simply, whatever. Like go back, like in to the history of the cosmos, right? The beginning, whatever, in the earlier stages. there were just like, biological systems at an early stage.
Mm-hmm.
Then eventually we have some form of consciousness evolving.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have some form of social systems evolving, or maybe or maybe they're evolving simultaneously. Maybe even social systems were somehow there before conscious.
It
I'm not sure.
depends. It
I wasn't
depends
there back.
if like
Yeah.
ants or insects are have social systems, but they most
Yes.
likely don't have consciousness or
Right. Yes.
yeah.
And so I'm not. I wasn't there, and I'm not good enough. Don't have enough knowledge in order to answer that question. But it seems to me, it seems to be quite obvious that biological system emerged before consciousness or social systems. That the existence of biological systems was a condition for the emergence of both consciousness and social systems.
Hmm.
And now, why shouldn't now another kind of system emerge within this already existing systemic complexity? Just as out of biological system, out of life, different kinds of systems like social and psychic consciousness systems.
Mm. I would say my spontaneous reaction from like a more monistic or you could even say like religious or spiritual perspective would be that at the time when there was none of the other systems, there was no meaningful distinction of a biological system. That I would assume that it is that they fundamentally have the same origin, that fundamentally there couldn't have been a distinction between biological, social, and conscious systems, and that with time they became distinguished, but in a sense had already been there. That they'd become made
You're right.
the
That's already a theological point.
yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
we should discuss that another time.
Sounds good.
Theology of AI.
That sounds good. Theology of AI. That's gonna be our next upcoming 10,000 episode series.
Yes,
All right. Thanks, Georg. Thanks for this quick insight into this topic. Very important stuff, and love talking to you. Talk to you next time.
that's true.